Now, on a bit more of a serious note, we were trying to determine how you'd describe your brand of humor. How would you describe it?
Funny.
The legendary stoner comedy duo Cheech and Chong are well known for their muddled jokes and undeniable connection on stage. Unexpected turns and difficult starts lie behind the bong jokes and cult classic flicks. Furthermore, this is only the beginning. There is a great deal more to it than what the average person is aware of. This true story demonstrates that it is possible for two individuals who first don't connect to eventually form a mystical bond and accomplish great things. Stay with us until the very end, because we have some shocking information to share with you. Now, let's begin. You know it's genuine when you hear the tale of how Cheech and Chong met. It seems almost too fantastical to be true, but it is. Plus, their legendary, decades-long comic adventure began in a Vancouver pub without a top. The wackiness and genius of it all are magnified by that. You could assume that most comedic duos you hear about shared a childhood or formed a connection over practical jokes. These two, nevertheless, are special. Tommy Chong and Richard Cheech Marin's lives were completely unlike from one another until destiny brought them together in a smoke-filled room and later on stage. Cheech, on the other hand, wasn't exactly preparing for a life of marijuana jokes and punchlines. Actually, he had no intention of ever doing comedic work. Although Cheech's father was a police officer, the young man from South Los Angeles had an entirely different path in life. He was a ceramics student. Instead of standing ovations, he had enrolled at California State University, Northridge, with dreams of clay wheels and kilns. However, the late 1960s were a tumultuous era, particularly for young males in the United States. Every choice was shadowed by the draft for the Vietnam War. A daring choice was made by Cheech when he was threatened with being transported abroad to fight a war in which he did not believe. He escaped to Canada. "I didn't want to get killed in Vietnam," he would later state uncomplicatedly. Avoiding the draft wasn't an easy decision, but it put him in Vancouver at the perfect time, even if he didn't realize it at the time. Imagine Cheech and Chong as two naive stoners who happened to get it big. Have a second look. Their actual narrative is full of unexpected turns. Stay tuned to the very end because, the first fact, this is the type of matter that is hardly discussed. Adapting to a foreign nation without a strategy wasn't exactly a picnic. Cheech had odd jobs like driving trucks and unloading carpets to make ends meet, but he never stopped making ceramics. Despite the chaos and uncertainty in his life, he persisted. Subsequently, he entered a nearby bar one evening in search of any form of employment that may sustain him. Even though it didn't appear all that spectacular at first glance, it was where his fate awaited. At the other end of this origin tale for comedies was Tommy Chong. There have been some intriguing detours in Tommy's life before. Despite his lack of comedic chops, the son of Chinese and Scottish-Irish parents had already achieved some notoriety in his musical career before he was even born in Edmonton, Alberta. Before getting signed by Motown, he played guitar for a band named Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. That might have stood on its own, didn't it? However, by the 1970s, Tommy had shifted his focus away from music and into a new sort of business. The Shanghai Junk, a topless bar located in Vancouver's Chinatown. To be sure, Tommy wasn't interested in running any old topless bar. Nah, he was looking for a change. He turned the Shanghai Junk into a hybrid of a strip club and an improv theater by combining burlesque with performance art. He had a sketch troupe he named City Works that would interject comedic sketches throughout the dancing performances. What an unusual combination, isn't it? However, it worked in some way. Because of this arrangement, Tommy was able to indulge his passions for trying new things and pushing limits. That being said, Cheech entered the Shanghai Junk one evening in 1970 with the intention of desperately seeking employment. He was in dire need of rent money and wasn't attempting to be humorous. After taking a quick glance at him, Tommy reasoned, why not? Cheech had an irresistible magnetic pull. It may have been his mood, his timing, or even his enthusiasm. Tommy extended an invitation to join the improv group nonetheless. The enchantment began at that point. Their connection was obvious, but they were both in the dark about what they had found at first. They began riffing off each other one night on stage and somehow got into a skit about a man trying to find his friend Dave. The ironic part? Scripted or not, the other man continued repeating, "Dave's not here," due to his extreme intoxication. Nothing was practiced. It was a sudden event. Conversely, the crowd went absolutely wild. In retrospect, Tommy claims it was all accidental. But that's how life works, isn't it? Their breakthrough came from that one routine, which originated in an entirely spontaneous situation. Plus, it showed them the potential of their partnership. When they were together, they were much funnier than when they were alone. It's not often like that. So, night after night, they continued performing together, and their performance gradually developed. It seemed like Tommy's character, the laid-back hippie, lived in a perpetual cloud of smoke. Cheech was the energetic, quick-witted, and hyperactive smart aleck. Their personalities complemented one another well. It was as if we were seeing opposing sides of the identical stoner coin. It became apparent that they have something unique as their reputation in Vancouver increased. After only a short time together, they made the decision to quit the club and tour as a comedy team. After establishing their moniker as Cheech and Chong, they were instantly recognizable as icons of the counterculture's comedic style. Their content was revolutionary for its day. It was daring, disrespectful, and unlike anything else out there. They were capturing the mindset of a whole generation with their gags. It all began when two men, one evading the draft and the other doing improv at a topless bar, crossed paths. It was unexpected, you know? After that, their success took off. In addition to making records and touring the country, they also directed films that would go on to become beloved classics. Their story's central theme, two individuals who met in the unlikeliest of places and made everyone laugh, remains unchanged, even as their star power increases. Things weren't always as laid back as they appeared on film, which is very surprising. The real-life interaction between Cheech and Chong was full of ups and downs, much like their stoner adventures. When the cameras stopped filming, what actually happened between the two? The reality can shock you if you don't keep watching to the very end. The friendship between Tommy Chong and Cheech Marin was far from the easygoing bromance that fans believed it to be, despite the great movie sequences, classic stoner jokes, and the thundering laughter that echoed through sold-out theaters. On screen, they appeared to be inseparable, two sides of the same eccentric coin. But behind the scenes, their collaboration was fraught with creative disagreements and actual tension that lasted for almost 20 years. It was a typical example of how the public could only see the final product and not the chaos that went into making it. Why did everything come crashing down if they were the perfect match? If you can get beyond the cannabis smoke and laughs, the narrative of Cheech and Tommy starts to address that question. Cheech Marin's autobiography claims that the reality is that he and Chong were never, strictly speaking, closest friends. Cheech likened their tie to that of brothers, saying that they were bound together not by love but by length, experience, and an unusual commitment. "We're related." He wrote, "We're not best friends," revealing the paradoxical nature of their relationship. Their fighting intensity might be palpable one second, and then With the flick of a switch, they could execute a hilarious comedic act with ease the next. Isn't that draining on an emotional level? However, that was simply the way their partnership worked for them. The way a pearl is made, Cheech said, is like an irritant inside the shell that, when compressed, becomes something lovely. This was their working relationship. Maybe what brought them together as comic superstars was also the thing that was driving a wedge between them. Their on-screen and off-stage chemistry, in Cheech's view, didn't necessarily stem from genuine affection for one another. On occasion, it occurred in spite of it. He remembered how they would continue performing as if nothing had transpired, even when tempers erupted and egos burst backstage. Although it appeared to be an admirable talent, their capacity to keep their personal problems out of their professional performances revealed deeper problems. In retrospect, Cheech would describe their exchange as having seemed like a push-and-pull dynamic. At times, you wished your brother would simply remain silent. On other occasions, you relied on him to support you. Although it made for hilarious comedic moments, the relationship was also somewhat unstable due to the continual emotional ups and downs. How did pride factor into this whole mess? According to the two guys, it's a really big one. The question of who got to decide on the final product was a big bone of contention. All 6 of their main films from 1978-1984, starring Tommy Chong, had them both listed as authors. However, Chong actually directed 4 of the films. This disparity became a very touchy thing, as Cheech subsequently described it, rather than a mere inconsistency. He had the impression that his own creative input was being minimized or perhaps disregarded. Chong may have justified the arrangement as a strategic trade-off, but Cheech saw through it to the unequal distribution of power on set. Even the screen became a target of the mounting stress at one point. It was in a documentary when Chong informed Cheech straight out that he was never deserving of the director's title. Isn't that an accusation with some serious weight? In response, Cheech lashed out, "That's a lie." He clearly wasn't complacent. Listening to them bicker about who should get the credit was unexpected, and perhaps disappointing for longtime viewers. But it provided a far more accurate depiction of their dynamic on set. Since both creative brains are entitled to their own opinion, it's only natural that they may clash from time to time. Their issues increased in tandem with their prominence. It felt like things started to turn around in the early 1980s, especially during the 1981 filming of Nice Dreams. At that point, Cheech sensed a more hostile change in the air. He claims that Chong's domineering tendencies manifested themselves when he wanted to take charge of every aspect of the project and decide on major decisions. Cheech felt cut off from a creative process he had contributed to from the start because of it. It felt less like a partnership and more like Cheech was just a sidekick. What happens to a team when one member feels like they don't matter? In 1985, everything reached a fever pitch. After the success of their album Get Out of My Room, Cheech approached Chong about recording a duet with him called Born in East LA, a song about which Cheech was quite enthusiastic. Chong, however, declined. Their comic partnership career came to an end after 17 years because he refused to be involved. Cheech went on and produced the music video and song independently, and it was a financially and critically fruitful endeavor. Despite this triumph, a significant schism had now opened up. Years later, with hindsight and maybe even a touch of humility, Chong acknowledged that he was likely to blame for their partnership's demise. He admitted that he had developed a healthy dose of megalomania. It was difficult for him to let go of the reins once he experienced the power and responsibility of directing. "Your word's God," he said, elaborating on the pitfall that several filmmakers experience when they begin to trust their own praise. Isn't it nearly tragic? The position that allowed him the most creative flexibility ended up being the dividing factor between them. Even yet, it's not impossible that they ran into each other again. They rejoined from time to time, usually for tours or interviews or documentaries, but their chemistry was never the same as it had been when they were at the top of their game. Actually, Cheech came right out and said that there was still a lot of animosity between them, even after they reconciled. Re-establishing cordial relations wasn't as easy as turning a switch. When scars extend over decades, the healing process becomes much more tedious. Cheech and Chong are widely recognized as the masters of stoner humor. Their carefree antics, fueled by dope, made audiences laugh and popularized cannabis culture long before it was cool. But there's a lot more to their narrative than meets the eye if you stop there. Since Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong's entertainment careers go well beyond the bong, it's easy to overlook their accomplishments under the fog of smoke and jokes. Their skills have really led them into animation, professional wrestling, political activism, and even serious documentary filmmaking. All areas you may not think. When not making jokes about pot, who are Cheech and Chong? You might be surprised by the response. Voice acting is an easy one to ignore, so let's start there. While most fans would not think of Cheech and Chong when they hear the word animated film, the two men have really achieved great success in that field. For example, Cheech Marin is known for his distinctive voice, which is silky with a hint of raspiness and brimming with charm. Disney undoubtedly took note. Cheech played the role of the energetic hyena Banzai in the legendary animated film The Lion King. Plus, his voice as the flamboyant lowrider Ramon is familiar to anybody who has followed the Cars series, yet there's more. Along with Robin Williams' Bat character, Cheech lends his voice skills to Fern Gully, the last rainforest, as the wise-cracking beetle Stump. Who knew that the genie would team up with the most famous cannabis comedian in the industry? Tommy Chong, naturally, was not a spectator either. Even if his voice acting isn't as well known, it's just as daring. On the long-running and notoriously irreverent cartoon comedy South Park, he established a weird little niche for himself. Plus, he played himself rather than a generic persona. Chong played a double cross in the Cherokee Hair Tampons episode, which mocked alternative health practices and new age wellness trends. As usual, it was South Park at its most wacky and bizarre. Plus, it proved that Chong could maintain a good performance while making fun of himself. In ways that their fans may not have anticipated, Cheech and Chong have demonstrated their versatility and range by lending their voices to a wide variety of characters, from those suitable for families to those with more explicit content. However, they did not limit themselves to the realm of animation. Entering the realm of professional wrestling was one of the more unexpected twists in Cheech and Chong's career. The iconic combination made an appearance on World Wrestling Entertainment's main show, WWE Raw, in March of 2010. You might be wondering why two seasoned cannabis comedians would appear on a wrestling program, obviously advertising their Get It Legal tour. Beyond that, though, they entered the ring with their trademark vivacity and sardonic wit. When they detected marijuana in wrestler Santino Marella's herbal tea, their interaction with Marella swiftly became absurd. As ridiculous as it seems, the whole thing really demonstrated how versatile they were. When Cheech and Chong went somewhere, they always managed to fit in, whether it was a comedy club, a cartoon studio, or a sports arena. On the other hand, there's the darker, less entertaining side of their narrative. Tommy Chong and Cheech Marin are becoming much more than simply comedians. They've left the comedy industry and entered the activist one, contributing their voices to serious documentaries about politics and health. The intensely intimate documentary, aka Tommy Chong, is a prime example. It chronicles Tommy's apprehension and trial by the American authorities for internet sales of glass pipes and bongs. The film highlighted the wider consequences of the damaging war on drugs and its selective enforcement, even though others may have dismissed it as a celebrity scandal. For many, the case was an unwarranted and politically heated illustration of how the system can punish someone just for their identity, regardless of their actions. Chong showed an introspective aspect to his performance that was on display when he spoke about his experience. With everything out of the way, how does this pertain to Cheech and Chong? Labeling them as just stoner comedians completely overlooks the point. From hilarious comedy about smoking joints to profound commentaries on justice, public health, and personal growth, these performers have reinvented themselves time and time again. A heritage of innovation, resiliency, and unfiltered honesty lies behind the laughter. We assure you, there is a great deal more yet to discover. Keep watching because we're going to reveal 5 things you didn't know about Cheech and Chong that will blow your mind. And the most shocking discovery will be revealed at the very end. To start, it was almost like they were in a Friday the 13th film. You can practically hear the faint echo of laughter through a dense haze of nostalgia and smoke when the names of iconic comic duos like Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong are brought up. But most people just nod and smile when they're mentioned. The comedic duo Cheech and Chong were more than that. They sparked a social revolution. Bell-bottoms and bandanas are undergoing a stoner revolution. What most people don't realize is that there were a lot of bizarre and implausible things that happened behind the scenes while they were famous, even if their films were crazy, funny, and ludicrous in the greatest manner imaginable. You can't help but ask, how much stranger could things have gotten once you hear these stories? First, here's something very fascinating. Cheech and Chong were almost in a Friday the 13th film. I kid you not. Are you able to fathom that? Envision Jason Voorhees, masked and lumbering through the forest, unexpectedly encountering 2 carefree stoners who are inadvertently tending to a cannabis field in the remote middle of nowhere. It was filmmaker Tom McLaughlin's original plan for Friday the 13th, Jason Lives. In 1986, when his picture revitalized the slasher franchise, McLaughlin had a daring, slightly crazy, and somewhat smart notion. He proposed a crossover to producer Frank Mancuso Jr. that would put Jason against Cheech and Chong, who would actually be more correctly described as bumming around. What is the plan? It was either the 2 of them were conducting a business in the forest, or they were acting out the part of young, naive camp counselors. In any case, mayhem and comedy would have undoubtedly followed. A genuine officer was the source of their license plate joke. You believed you've heard everything? You won't find that kind of bizarre tale in their archives. In Up in Smoke, their MUF DVR license plate was one of the most memorable movie scenes. One of the most iconic visual gags in stoner cinema history is that playful detail. The secret ingredient, though, that few fans are aware of, is that neither Cheech nor Chong had anything to do with its creation. What is the true story behind that dish? A real-life police officer owned it. I agree with it. A real-life Los Angeles Police Department officer who, ironically, was likely not the biggest admirer of the duo's cannabis-fueled comedy, owned the special MUF DVR plate. It wasn't a fabrication conjured up by an art department in Hollywood. This dish in particular has quite a story to tell. It all began with a less-than-stellar American Motors Gremlin, you guessed it, the automobile model that is the punchline to many jokes about cars. It then settled on a modified VW Bug, after briefly considering a sleek T-top Corvette, which would have given it an immediate boost to its cool appeal. Until its retirement in 1986, that insect would be the plate's mascot. Not only that, but the original owner has the plates to this day, complete with stickers from the California DMV. It's one of those bizarre turns of events when the actuality turns out to be even more fantastical than the film. In fact, isn't that the spirit of Cheech and Chong's work all about? Their entire career seems to have been a never-ending string of fortuitous events, one-liners, and vague recollections that somehow managed to become cultural gold. What these two accomplished behind the zany costumes, outrageous acts, and smoky atmosphere was something absurd and rebellious. What they did was hot-box the limits, not merely push them. Plus, they nearly confronted a legendary slasher, or accidentally made a police officer's license plate famous. That further enhances the wacky and fantastic mystique that envelops them. In light of this, you might want to suggest that the next time someone claims that stoner humor lacks cultural depth or that comedy is easy or simple, they watch more Cheech and Chong. Because there is an interesting, bizarre, and twisted history that most people are unaware of, hidden behind all the jokes and laughter about marijuana. Honestly, isn't that what makes going back to their films so much more enjoyable? Who knows what other strange mysteries may be hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be unearthed? With a dislocated shoulder, Jack Nicholson laughed. Despite Jack Nicholson's long history of fame and renowned filmography, there are certain stories that even a man of his stature can't help but wonder. Did that really happen? Among those remarkable anecdotes is the one about how he laughed through physical agony at a comedy film screening. Producer Lou Adler claims that Nicholson was in a very bad condition when he showed up to see an early screening of the stoner classic Up in Smoke. Why? Reason being, he had just suffered a dislocated shoulder after being involved in an automobile accident. A dislocated shoulder indeed. Now, everybody who has ever been hurt, no matter how little, knows how difficult it is to laugh while in agony. Imagine for a second that you are Jack Nicholson, sitting in a theater trying not to move too much. And most importantly, you are not supposed to laugh, because any kind of laughter would cause painful jolts to go through your arm. Was he still able to react, though? In no way. Adler distinctly recalled that Nicholson had been instructed not to laugh, even given medical orders, but he simply couldn't control himself. Because the laughing hurt, Nicholson would involuntarily make these noises every time a punchline was delivered. Grunts, moans, and a chorus of ughs and ohs. Nevertheless, the laughter continued to flow anyway. Those responses, strangely enough, served as a gauge for the crew. A joke was truly worth keeping if it could penetrate agony and elicit an uncomfortable chuckle. Inadvertently, his unease became the most genuine kind of audience testing that could be imagined. It's incredible that something so unpleasant may have a positive outcome. Funny aside, remember that classic beat-up Volkswagen Beetle Tommy Chong drove at the opening of the film? It was Jack Nicholson's genuine vehicle, not one of those props from the lot. Envision Jack zipping around Los Angeles in that eccentric little vehicle before to its premiere in theaters. The fourth one, Nice Dreams, has a 3.5-page screenplay. Did you know that the creative process of Cheech and Chong might be as out there as their comedic style when it comes to making films? Consider the 1981 picture Nice Dreams, which has them. Reportedly, there were just 3.5 pages in the script, if that is indeed the right term. That's right, just 3.5, no more than 30 or 300 words. You just need enough to jot down the essential concept, a few visual clues, and an approximate course of action. Their original plan called for them to portray landscapers in Los Angeles who were also cultivating marijuana behind the scenes. Imagine Cheech and Chong, daytime hedge clippers and nighttime budge harvesters. A narrative involving the sale of pot from an ice cream truck topped with a gigantic clown mask evolved from that original idea, as do many of their productions, into something much crazier and funnier. Do not assume that they were only winging it on set because of the little script. Their physical humor and visual pranks may appear chaotic on TV, but they were actually quite calculated. Thorough storyboarding was done for the whole film. Everything from the pratfalls to the pursuit scenes and the comedy moments was meticulously prepared in advance. When you give it some thought, it's rather incredible. How is it possible for a film with such an organic, carefree vibe to have such meticulous choreography? Still, that's how Cheech and Chong work their magic. They made it appear effortless, but in reality, it was quite difficult. We have reached the final segment of this video. Much obliged for your time. Please hit the like, comment, and subscribe button if you found this video entertaining. If you would want to see more exciting stories, you should watch the video that appears on your screen.